The air conditioning in conference room B rattled with a low, uneven hum. It smelled like old paper, stale coffee, and lemon furniture polish. I kept my eyes focused on the heavy oak table. Across the polished wood sat the woman who gave birth to me. Donna. Her dyed auburn hair showed 2 solid inches of stark white roots at the part. She was rubbing a dollop of cheap hand cream into her knuckles over and over again. Next to her, slumped in a chrome wheelchair, was Gary. The right side of his face drooped. His eyes, however, were sharp, tracking every movement in the room. Between them sat their lawyer, Wade Prescott. He was sweating in a cheap gray suit. His tie sat crooked against a wrinkled collar, and he kept shuffling the same stack of files, the edges of the pages brushing against the wood. My attorney reached into her briefcase. She pulled out a thin manila folder. She slid a single piece of paper across the table toward the judge. Just 1 page. The judge picked it up. He read it. The room grew entirely still. The only sound was the faint squeak of Gary shifting his weight in the wheelchair. The judge read the page a second time. He took off his reading glasses. He let them drop onto his desk. The clatter echoed off the bare walls. He did not look at my mother. He looked directly at Wade. "Counselor," the judge said. His voice was completely flat. "Who exactly advised your clients to file this claim?" Wade opened his mouth. A dry clicking sound came out. He closed it. He looked at the single sheet of paper, then at Donna, then down at his scuffed dress shoes. Donna stopped rubbing her hands together. Her fingers started to tremble. Gary stared straight ahead, his jaw locked. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. I did not smile. I did not feel a rush of victory or vindication. A dull, heavy ache settled directly behind my ribs. I looked down at the sleeves of my blazer. I had borrowed it from a coworker that morning. The sleeves were 1/2 inch too long, so I had folded the cuffs up once. I am 36 years old. I work as a senior project manager at Hargrove Construction. I spend my days in steel-toe boots and flannel shirts. I had never needed a suit jacket before today. My hands rested on my lap. The skin on my palms was permanently calloused from my early years working as a laborer on dusty job sites. I looked back up at the single, thin sheet of paper resting on the judge's desk. 23 years. That is how long it took for those black ink strokes to matter. 6 weeks ago, I did not even know that piece of paper existed. 6 weeks ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was Brooke Ellison, independent, untouchable. I built things for a living. I managed million-dollar renovations in the Strip District of Pittsburgh. I spent my mornings drinking black coffee in a site trailer, telling concrete crews and drywall suppliers exactly what to do. The wind blowing off the Allegheny River was always freezing in November, bringing the smell of wet cement and diesel fuel. I loved it. I loved the noise, the dust, the absolute predictability of a blueprint. If you measure things correctly, the building stands. If you follow the plan, you are safe. My life was rigid, ordered, completely empty of surprises. I lived in a narrow, spotless townhouse in Lawrenceville that I bought with my own money. I paid off my student loans 3 years early. I kept my savings account padded. Every paycheck, every promotion, every mortgage payment was a brick in the wall I had built between myself and the world. I thought the wall was solid. I thought I had left the past behind me at 13, the day a county vehicle drove me away from a house where nobody came out to the porch to wave goodbye. I spent 23 years proving that I did not need a family. I convinced myself that being alone was a choice I made, a shield I forged myself, rather than a sentence handed down to me. I walked through my days believing I was perfectly fine. I ignored the cardboard box pushed to the darkest corner of my bedroom closet. It had moved with me through 7 different apartments. I never opened it. I told myself I did not care what was inside. But 6 weeks ago, the mail arrived, and the wall I spent my entire adult life building collapsed under the weight of a single certified envelope. 6 weeks ago, the world made absolute sense. The Strip District renovation project was a full week ahead of schedule. The morning air smelled of wet concrete and the metallic ozone from the welding torches. A bitter wind whipped off the Allegheny River, bringing the chill of late November, cutting right through my heavy flannel shirt. I stood on the third floor of the mixed-use development, checking the framing against my blueprints. The drills whined loudly from the floor below. Workers shouted over the noise, moving materials precisely where I told them to go. I trusted blueprints because they never lied to you. If you measured the angles correctly, the building stood. If you followed the plan, you remained safe. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. Noon meant retreating to the site trailer. Muddy boots scraped against the metal steps. The space was cramped, heated by a rattling space heater in the corner that smelled faintly of burning dust. Lena sat across the small folding table from me. She was 30-something, friendly, and possessed a habit of filling the quiet spaces I usually left empty. She unwrapped a deli sandwich and leaned forward. "So get this," Lena said, her mouth half full. "My Ancestry DNA kit finally came back. I am 12% Scandinavian. My mother is losing her absolute mind." Lena laughed, tapping her bright phone screen. I took a bite of my apple, chewing slowly. "Good for you," I said. My voice carried no particular weight. Lena did not take the hint. "You should try it. You never know. You might find secret siblings or some crazy family history." I looked out the trailer window at the gray Pittsburgh sky. "I know who I am." I shifted my attention back to the clipboard and changed the subject to the afternoon drywall delivery schedule. I should have paid attention to that brief, cold tightening in my chest. I did not. I simply pushed it away, the same way I pushed away everything else that did not serve an immediate purpose. That afternoon, I drove back to my townhouse in Lawrenceville. The space was narrow, pristine, completely under my control. A single photograph held court on the refrigerator door. It was a selfie of a 22-year-old girl in a graduation gown, holding a University of Pittsburgh diploma. No proud parents stood beside her. No friends crowded the frame. Just me, holding the proof of my own survival. I spent the evening replacing the sliding track on my bedroom closet door. When I reached up to test the upper wheel, my knuckles brushed against a cardboard box shoved deep into the top corner. Heavy black marker bled through the side of the corrugated cardboard. The letters read B.E. Foster. The box felt as dense as a cinder block. It held every scrap of paper from my years in the system. It had moved with me through 7 different addresses. I pushed it further into the shadow, pressing until it hit the back wall. I never opened it. I survived by keeping that box closed. The truth lived in there, and I had chosen a long time ago to live without it. Then came Tuesday. I returned home from the gym. The muscles in my arms burned from the weights, a good, clean ache. I unlocked my metal mailbox in the lobby. I pulled out supermarket flyers, 2 bills, and a thick envelope. It was certified mail. I had signed the delivery slip for the postman that morning without glancing at the return address. Now, standing in my quiet kitchen, I read the bold lettering in the corner. Prescott Legal Services, Clairton, Pennsylvania. I tore the flap open. The paper inside was heavy, the edges sharp against my thumb. The text was printed in crisp Times New Roman font. A formal heading grabbed my attention. Court of Common Pleas, Allegheny County. My eyes moved to the very next line. Plaintiffs, Donna M. Ellison and Gary R. Ellison. The air left the room. I did not gasp. I did not scream. My knees simply stopped holding my weight. I sank down until my back hit the base of the kitchen cabinets. The cold floor tile pressed through my sweatpants. I sat on the floor and read the names again. Donna, Gary. 2 names I had refused to speak, write, or think about for 11 years. The names of the people who packed my bags when I was 13. Wade Prescott, attorney for plaintiffs. The document claimed that under Pennsylvania state law, I had a filial responsibility to support my indigent parents. Gary had suffered a massive stroke 2 years ago. He needed long-term rehabilitation and facility care. Medicare did not cover the extended costs. The final paragraph demanded that I, the defendant, pay a remaining medical balance of $127,432. The court order sought a monthly support garnishment from my wages. I read the enormous sum again. I let the pages drop onto the floor between my sneakers. They knew where I lived. They knew my full name. They had searched public records, found my property, found my career. They had tracked me down. After 23 years of absolute silence, they found me. No birthday cards after that first year, no phone calls, no letters asking if I was alive, if I had enough to eat, if I ever made it to college. Nothing. And now they reached out. Because they needed money. Their very first communication in over 2 decades was a court summons. I picked up the heavy pages. I folded them, creasing the edges perfectly, aligning every corner. I placed the envelope gently on the granite counter. I walked to the sink and washed my hands. I filled a pot with water. I turned on the stove. I put pasta into the boiling water. I ate at the small kitchen island. I brought my empty bowl back to the sink. I turned on the faucet. The sponge moved over the ceramic surface, wiping away the leftover sauce. Then I kept scrubbing. The bowl was completely clean, but my hands would not stop moving. The water ran and ran, splashing over my wrists, turning my skin bright red from the heat. I watched the water swirl down the drain until the hot water tank ran completely empty and the stream turned freezing cold. Sleep did not come that night. I lay on my back in the dark. The streetlights outside cast long, distorted shadows across my bedroom ceiling. My fingers gripped the edge of the blanket, pulling it incredibly tight across my chest. My jaw ached. I had been grinding my teeth for hours. Just a few feet away, hidden in the dark upper corner of my closet, the cardboard box seemed to pull the oxygen straight out of the room. I could almost hear it sitting there. I watched the shadows stretch and fade as dawn broke over the city. When the digital clock hit 6 in the morning, I reached for my phone on the nightstand. I dialed the site manager. I told him I was not coming in today. It was the very first time I had called in sick in 4 years. By 8 o'clock that morning, the sun finally burned through the dense river fog, but my kitchen remained entirely dark. I sat at the granite island with my laptop open. The cursor blinked steadily in the search bar. I typed 3 words, Filial Responsibility, Pennsylvania. The results populated instantly. I clicked the first legal summary and read through the dense paragraphs. My eyes snagged on a state Supreme Court precedent from 2012. A court had ordered an adult son to pay $93,000 for his mother's nursing home care, simply because he possessed the financial means to do so. He had not signed a contract. He had not agreed to be a guarantor. The law simply stated that blood tied his wallet to her debt. My mouth went completely dry. I closed the laptop, grabbed my truck keys off the counter, and walked out the door. The drive into downtown Pittsburgh felt like moving underwater. I navigated the heavy morning traffic on Liberty Avenue without really seeing the brake lights flashing ahead of me. I parked in a damp concrete garage and walked 2 blocks to the Legal Aid Society office. The waiting room smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. I sat in a hard plastic chair for 45 minutes, staring at a stack of outdated magazines, until a tired-looking intake paralegal finally called my name. She led me into a cramped cubicle. Her desk was buried under mountains of expanding file folders. She reviewed Wade Prescott's summons, her pen hovering over the crisp paper. "You have 3 options," the paralegal said, not looking up. "You ignore this, and they get a default judgment. They will garnish your wages and place a lien on your property. Option 2, you negotiate a settlement, pay a portion to make them go away. Option 3, you file an answer and contest the claim." I gripped the cold metal edge of her desk. "I want option 3. She finally looked at me, taking in my scuffed work boots and plain flannel shirt. "The filial responsibility statute in Pennsylvania is archaic, but it is heavily enforced," she explained. "They can force you to pay for his medical care, his nursing facility, everything Medicare refuses to cover. To contest it, you need an ironclad defense. You have to prove extreme financial hardship, or you have to prove abandonment for a period of 10 consecutive years prior to your 18th birthday." "I was in foster care," I said. My voice sounded remarkably steady. They gave me up. The paralegal stopped writing. She set her pen down. "Gave you up how? Was it a temporary placement? Did the court order it, or did they sign voluntary relinquishment papers?" "I don't know. I was 13. That matters. It matters a lot, she said, leaning forward. If their parental rights were legally terminated, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, there is a very strong argument that filial responsibility does not apply to you. The statute hinges on an existing parent and child relationship. If that relationship was legally severed by the state, they have absolutely no claim to your money. She paused, her eyes searching my face. Do you have any documents from that time? The cubicle grew very quiet. I thought about the top shelf of my bedroom closet. I thought about the heavy cardboard box pushing against the back wall. I'll find it, I told her. The traffic back to Lawrenceville crawled, but I did not turn on the radio. The silence inside the cab of my truck stretched out, thick and suffocating. When I finally unlocked my front door, the late afternoon light was already fading into a dull, bruised purple. I walked straight past the kitchen, down the narrow hallway, and into my bedroom. I slid the closet door open. I did not give myself time to hesitate. I reached up, grabbed the bottom edge of the cardboard box, and pulled it down. It was heavy, coated in a fine layer of dust that stuck to my palms. I dropped it onto the hardwood floor at the foot of my bed. I sat down cross-legged in front of it. 10 minutes passed. I just looked at the thick black marker bleeding through the cardboard. B.E. Foster. It had moved with me through 7 different apartments, completely sealed with packing tape, functioning as a perfect time capsule of everything I refused to remember. I went to the kitchen, retrieved a utility knife, and returned to the bedroom. The blade sliced through the yellowed tape with a sharp tearing sound. The adhesive had turned brittle, flaking away onto the hardwood. I opened the flaps. The smell of old paper and dusty plastic hit the air. I reached inside. The top layer held my scattered school transcripts from 3 different districts, my original birth certificate, an expired paper Medicaid card. Beneath those lay a gallon-sized Ziploc bag. I pulled it out. Inside were 2 plastic butterfly hair clips, a wooden ruler with the name of my middle school printed on it, and a sealed envelope. Beneath the bag sat a thin manila folder. The label bore a faded stamp. Allegheny County Department of Human Services, case number 037741. I opened the folder. The top document was a poor photocopy, but the bold heading was perfectly legible. Decree of voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. I traced the date with my index finger. March 14th, 2003. Below the legal boilerplate sat the 2 signature lines, Donna Marie Ellison, Gary Robert Ellison. Both sets of handwriting were rushed, pressing hard into the paper. Under the section demanding a reason for the relinquishment, someone had written a single sentence in blue ink. Unable to provide adequate care. I read the words again. Unable to provide adequate care. 6 words. That was the entire explanation for the last 23 years of my life. I set the legal decree on the floor and picked up the Ziploc bag. I reached inside and pulled out the sealed envelope. It was a birthday card, decorated with a faded cartoon cake. It had not come from my foster parents. Donna had slipped it into my duffel bag on the morning the county vehicle arrived. I had found it 3 days later. I opened the card. The handwriting inside was shaky, entirely different from the firm's signature on the court document. Happy 13th, baby girl. I hope you know this isn't what I wanted. I ran my thumb over the dried ink. I hope you know this isn't what I wanted. She had taken the time to buy a card. She had felt enough guilt to write those words and hide them in my clothes. But a few hours later, she had still walked into a sterile county office, picked up a pen, and signed her name on the dotted line. The birthday card proved she had feelings. The court document proved exactly what she was willing to do about them. I placed the birthday card next to the legal decree. I finally had the weapon I needed to stop Wade Prescott. I gathered the papers together, my hands moving with steady, mechanical precision, while a cold, hollow space opened up directly behind my ribs. 3 days later, I stood inside the Allegheny County Department of Human Services. The downtown Pittsburgh office smelled of industrial floor wax and stale coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed continuously overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow over rows of gray cubicles. Telephones rang in the distance, a relentless sound that nobody seemed to answer. I sat across a remarkably tidy desk from Janine Crawford. She was a supervisor now, a woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes and a blunt, practical haircut. She had been the caseworker who handled my transfers between foster homes 23 years ago. Janine did not offer me a pitying smile. She did not tilt her head or soften her voice. I respected her instantly for that. She simply opened a thick digital file on her computer monitor. "I remember you," Janine said. Her voice was steady and direct. "You were the quiet one. House 2 and House 3. You never cried. You never acted out. You just kept asking when you could go home." I looked at her keyboard. "I stopped asking after House 2. Janine nodded once. She turned her attention back to the screen, typing my case number into the database. She clicked through several screens, confirming the details I had found in the cardboard box. March 2003. Voluntary relinquishment. Signed by both parents. Accepted by the court. Then she stopped scrolling. She leaned closer to the monitor, her brow furrowing. "The form you have says they were unable to provide adequate care," Janine said, her eyes scanning the glowing text. "But the intake notes from the original interview say something else." I sat perfectly still. My hands rested flat on my thighs. "What do the notes say?" Janine turned the monitor slightly so I could see the screen. "Father states child is not biologically his. Cites blood type incompatibility. No paternity test documentation provided." The buzzing of the fluorescent lights suddenly sounded incredibly loud, drowning out the ringing phones. The air simply left my lungs. "What?" I whispered. "That is what is in the system," Janine said quietly. "Your father told the caseworker you were not his child." My fingers curled inward, digging into the fabric of my jeans. My mind flashed back to the construction trailer, to Lena laughing over her sandwich, talking about her Scandinavian DNA results. I had told her I knew who I am. I had built my entire adult identity around the belief that my parents simply could not afford me, or did not want the burden of a teenager. I had rationalized their decision to survive it. I told myself we were poor. I built a shield out of the idea that I was an economic burden. But poverty was just the excuse written on the official paperwork. The truth was something else entirely. Gary threw me away because he looked at a blood type chart and made a completely unverified assumption. I swallowed hard. The back of my throat felt like sandpaper. "Did they verify it?" Janine shook her head. "No, but your file has a sealed addendum. It contains the original caseworker's personal assessment notes." I never read it. It was not my case at the start. I only handled your placement after the fact. To unseal it, you need to submit a formal written request. How long does that take? "Usually 5 to 7 business days," Janine answered. She pulled a blank form from her desk drawer and slid it across the desk. I filled it out immediately, my pen pressing so hard into the paper it nearly tore through the thin sheet. When I stood up to leave, Janine walked me to the glass security door. "I handled your placement," Janine said, looking me squarely in the eye. "I did not investigate the relinquishment. I had 47 other cases that month. That is an explanation, not an excuse. I should have looked deeper." I walked out into the cold downtown air. The wind off the Allegheny River hit my face, biting into my cheeks, but I barely felt it. That night, my townhouse was completely silent. The glow of my laptop screen illuminated the dark kitchen. I did not cry. I did not panic. I had work to do. The plastic keys clicked sharply as I navigated to the DNA Diagnostics Center website. They were a certified private laboratory located right here in Pittsburgh. I ordered an avuncular kinship testing kit. I did not need Gary to spit into a tube. I would compare my own swab against the public databases. I had already ordered an Ancestry DNA kit earlier in the week, but that would take weeks to process. The private lab offered an expedited service for $300. They guaranteed results in 3 to 5 business days. I entered my credit card information and hit submit. I opened a new tab. I typed Wade Prescott into the search bar. The State Bar Association records showed no formal complaints against him. He ran a solo practice, focusing on elder law and personal injury. But the Google reviews told a very different story. He hovered around 3 stars. One review caught my eye immediately. The user wrote that Wade showed up at her mother's rehabilitation facility, promised them the world, and delivered absolutely nothing. He trolled hospital waiting rooms looking for desperate people. I dug deeper. On the 5th page of search results, I found a small article archived from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. It was dated 8 months ago. Wade Prescott had lost a massive personal injury lawsuit. The judge had ordered him to pay the opposing counsel's court costs. I opened the county property records. Wade had refinanced his small office building just 6 months ago. The pieces clicked together perfectly. The man was drowning in debt. That was exactly why he pounced on Donna's case without doing proper due diligence. He saw a homeowner with a good salary, an obscure filial responsibility law, and a desperate family. He needed a quick payout too badly to check if my parents still had legal rights. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I opened a medical journal database and searched for blood type inheritance. The results were dense with genetic terminology, but the conclusion was absolutely clear. Parents with seemingly incompatible blood types could easily produce a child with a different type. Weak subgroups. The Bombay phenotype, simple genetic mutations. A high school biology chart found on the internet was not proof of anything. Gary had looked at a chart, decided I belonged to another man, and threw me away. He never asked a doctor. He never ordered a test. He was too arrogant to question his own conclusion. I closed the laptop. The screen went black, plunging the kitchen into darkness. I sat at the granite island, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator. I had sent away for the truth. Now, all I had to do was wait for it to arrive. 3 weeks after Wade Prescott's thick envelope landed in my mailbox, a much thinner one arrived. I stood in my kitchen, the afternoon light cutting sharp angles across the granite island. The air smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner I had just used to scrub the countertops. The envelope bore the logo of the DNA Diagnostic Center, and tucked right behind it was the bright packaging of my ancestry DNA results. Both had arrived on the exact same afternoon. I placed them on the exact same spot where I had read the court summons. My hands did not shake. My breathing remained perfectly steady. I had spent the last 21 days bracing myself for either answer. I believed I was ready for whatever the paper held. I opened the heavy laboratory envelope first. The expedited private results were printed on thick, watermarked paper. My eyes skipped past the dense paragraphs of genetic methodology, landing squarely on the bold text at the bottom of the page. Paternal lineage match. 99.98% probability. The text blurred for a fraction of a second, then sharpened. Brooke A. Ellison shares a paternal haplogroup with Ellison lineage markers consistent with a direct father and daughter relationship. I picked up the second envelope, tearing the cardboard flap of the public registry kit. I logged into the database on my laptop. The screen loaded, displaying a family tree web. A bright green circle blinked next to a profile belonging to a 27-year-old man in Ohio. The system identified him as a first cousin. The shared centimorgans were massive. I knew Gary's family history. He was an only son. His only sibling was a sister who had one boy. This match in Ohio was Gary's nephew's son. The digital line connected us directly. 2 separate laboratories, 2 entirely different testing methods, both screaming the exact same truth. 99.98%. Finding out your father is actually your father is supposed to be a good thing. It is supposed to mend the broken pieces, to erase the stigma of being the illegitimate child, the mistake outside the marriage. It should have brought closure. It should have proven that the man in the wheelchair was simply misguided. Instead, the air vanished from the kitchen. My chest caved in. If I was his biological daughter, then the story was infinitely worse than I had ever imagined. Gary Ellison had looked at me, his own flesh and blood, and decided I belonged to a stranger. He made that decision based on a rudimentary blood type chart he found on a dial-up internet connection in 2003. He never consulted a physician. He never swabbed his cheek. He never spent $200 to verify his suspicion. He was simply too arrogant to ever question his own absolute authority. He pronounced me a bastard, and that was the end of it. And the woman who bought me the birthday card? Donna had to know. She knew she had never been with another man. She knew I belonged to her husband. Yet, When Gary demanded I be removed from his house, she did not fight. She did not scream for a paternity test. She did not drag him to a clinic to prove her fidelity and save her daughter. She chose to keep the peace. She chose the man who accused her of infidelity over the child she birthed. My knees gave out. For the second time in 3 weeks, I slid down the face of the kitchen cabinets until I hit the cold floor tiles. I pulled my knees to my chest. I wrapped my arms around my legs, pulling tight, trying to hold my ribcage together. The silence in the townhouse pressed against my eardrums. I was not thrown away because I was a financial burden. I was not thrown away because I belonged to another man. I was thrown away because my father could not possibly be wrong, and my mother was entirely too weak to make him right. I sat on the floor until the square of sunlight faded from the granite counter. Then I reached for my phone. I dialed the Department of Human Services. Janine Crawford answered on the second ring. "The DNA came back," I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from a very long distance away. "I am his. Both tests confirm it. I need that sealed addendum." Janine took a slow breath. I heard the rustle of paper through the receiver. "Your request was approved this morning. I was actually just about to call you. Brooke, I have the file right here on my desk. Come down to my office to read it. Do not read this alone." 2 days passed since the laboratories delivered the genetic proof to my kitchen counter. 2 days since Janine told me the sealed addendum was waiting on her desk. I had not gone down to the county office yet. I told myself I needed to clear a massive concrete pour at the Strip District site first. I told myself the construction schedule could not wait. The truth was much simpler. The envelope sitting in downtown Pittsburgh held the final piece of the puzzle, and my hands were completely full carrying the pieces I already had. The Thursday morning air was bitterly cold. A freezing drizzle coated the windshield of my Ford Ranger. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine idling, parked just outside the chain-link fence of the job site. The heater blasted dry, scorching air against my shins. My heavy work boots rested on the floor mats. I held a cardboard cup of black coffee, letting the cheap heat seep into my calloused palms. Outside, a pile driver rhythmically slammed into the frozen earth. The heavy thud vibrated through the metal frame of my truck. My phone buzzed in the center console. The screen illuminated. An unfamiliar 412 area code flashed in bright white numbers. I set my coffee in the cup holder. We were expecting a massive delivery of steel beams from a new supplier in McKeesport, and the logistics manager had warned me about potential routing delays. I assumed it was a lost truck driver. I tapped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. Brooke Ellison speaking. The line crackled with a faint burst of static. Heavy breathing echoed through the tiny speaker. Then, a voice broke the silence. "Brooke, baby girl." My right hand froze halfway back to my coffee cup. The engine continued to hum. The pile driver slammed into the dirt outside. But inside the cab of my truck, the oxygen simply evaporated. The voice belonged to an older woman. It was thin, trembling, coated in a thick Western Pennsylvania accent. It was a voice I had not heard since I was 13 years old, standing on a cracked concrete porch with a nylon duffel bag slung over my shoulder. Donna, my mother. My chest seized. A sharp, phantom pain radiated straight through my collarbone. She had called me baby girl. She used the exact same 2 words written inside the birthday card, currently sitting in a cardboard box on my bedroom floor. She said the words so casually, so effortlessly. She said them exactly like a mother who had been saying them every single day for 2 decades, calling out from the kitchen, instead of a woman who had signed her child away to the county and vanished. I did not speak. 5 seconds ticked by, then 10. The silence stretched tight enough to snap. "I know you got the legal papers," Donna said. Her voice dropped to a pleading whisper. "I know exactly how it looks to you, but your father is dying, Brooke. He had a massive stroke. He can barely talk. He sits in a chair all day long. Medicare refuses to cover the rehabilitation facility. The bills are piling up so fast. We are going to lose the house. We just need a little bit of help." My jaw locked. My teeth ground together so hard a dull ache shot straight up into my temples. She was using the word we. "We need help. We are going to lose the house. She was attempting to build a bridge over a 23-year canyon using nothing but cheap guilt and unpaid medical invoices. You have the wrong number, I said. My voice was entirely flat. It sounded like it belonged to a stranger. Do not do this, Donna begged. The tremor in her throat amplified. Please do not do this to me. I am your mother. Whatever happened in the past, whatever mistakes were made, we are still a family. Blood is blood, Brooke. You cannot change that. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned completely white. Blood is blood. The sheer audacity of the phrase physically repulsed me. My father had discarded me because he believed my blood did not match his. My mother had stood quietly by and let him do it. No, I said, cutting through her rising panic. You changed that. March 14th, 2003. A long, ragged intake of breath hissed through the speaker. Then Donna began to cry. It was not a quiet, dignified weeping. It was a loud, wet, desperate sound. But I remembered that crying. I remembered it from my childhood. Donna's tears never fell without a specific purpose. She wept to end arguments. She wept to avoid taking responsibility. She wept to make whoever was standing in the room feel like a monster for making her sad. She cried loudly into the phone, and through the heavy sobs, she offered the only defense she possessed. I did not have a choice. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I pressed the red button on the screen. The line went dead. I dropped the phone into the passenger seat. My hands were shaking. I grabbed the steering wheel, pressing my forehead against the cold leather. I sat in the idling truck for 15 minutes. The windows slowly fogged over from my breath, hiding the construction site, hiding the street, isolating me in a small gray box. I had spent my entire adult life proving that their rejection meant nothing. Yet, one phone call from a woman desperate for cash had completely unraveled me. 4 agonizing days dragged by. The cold snap in Pittsburgh deepened, turning the rain to sleet. I pushed my crew relentlessly at the job site, burying myself in drywall schedules and electrical inspections. I avoided downtown. I avoided Janine Crawford. I wanted to remain in motion because stopping meant I would have to think about Donna's voice. On Monday evening, I sat at my kitchen island. The townhouse was perfectly still. I opened my laptop to check a supplier invoice, but a new message in my personal email inbox caught my attention. It was forwarded from the legal aid attorney handling my defense. The subject line read, "Urgent communication regarding Ellison settlement." I clicked the email. Attached was a scanned letter from Wade Prescott's law office. The stationery looked cheap even through a digital scan. The legal jargon was dense, aggressive, and entirely pompous. Wade wrote that if I did not agree to negotiate a private financial settlement before the upcoming court hearing, he would be forced to explore all available remedies. I read the final paragraph 3 times. Wade explicitly stated that those remedies included public advocacy for elderly rights. He threatened to contact local media outlets. He wanted to frame the narrative before we ever stepped foot inside a courtroom. Daughter refuses to help dying parents. A wealthy, successful project manager abandons her disabled father and desperate mother in their darkest hour. Wade knew the optics were terrible for me if the story reached the public with only one side attached to it. I picked up my phone and called the legal aid attorney. She answered with a tired sigh, the sound of a woman managing 80 active case files. I read the letter. I said, "It is a bluff," the attorney assured me instantly. "Prescott has absolutely no media contacts. He is an ambulance chaser. He knows our defense regarding the relinquishment document is strong, so he is trying to scare you into settling before the judge throws his case out. It is an extortion play. Do not let it rattle you." "I am not settling," I told her. "I am not paying them a single dime." "Good. Stay the course. We have the hearing date scheduled for next week." I ended the call and set the phone on the granite counter. The attorney told me not to worry. She called it a bluff. But Wade Prescott did not need to be a media mastermind to cause catastrophic damage to my life. I opened a new tab on my web browser. I stared at the blinking cursor. Slowly, I typed my own name. Brooke A. Ellison, Pittsburgh. I hit the enter key. The search results populated in less than a second. My entire life spilled across the glowing white screen. The first link led directly to my LinkedIn profile. It displayed my smiling professional headshot. It listed my current title as Senior Project Manager at Hargrove Construction. It detailed my exact employment history, my promotion timeline, and my graduation honors from the University of Pittsburgh. The second link directed me to the Allegheny County Real Estate Assessment Portal. My home address in Lawrenceville sat plainly on the screen, right next to the purchase date and the current assessed property value. The third link featured a local business journal article from 2 years ago, praising my firm for completing a massive downtown revitalization project ahead of schedule. My name was featured in the third paragraph, citing my efficiency and leadership. I scrolled down the page, feeling a cold knot twist deep in my stomach. I was an open book. I had built everything from absolute zero. I had scrubbed dishes, hauled concrete, and studied under flickering library lights to earn my degrees. I took pride in my resume. I took pride in my property. I believed every single accomplishment was a heavy brick adding structural integrity to my fortress. But I had left the blueprints to the fortress lying on the front lawn. Wade Prescott did not have to hire a private investigator. He did not have to work hard to find me. He simply typed my name into a search engine and saw a woman who possessed a stable salary, a valuable piece of real estate, and a pristine professional reputation. He saw a target with a great deal to lose. I pushed the laptop away. The screen illuminated the dark kitchen, casting harsh shadows against the cabinets. This was never about a family reaching out. Donna calling me baby girl was nothing but a tactical maneuver. They saw my success on a computer screen and calculated exactly how much they could extract from it. I had spent 2 decades isolating myself to ensure I would never need them, but the very independence I cultivated was exactly what made me visible to their greed. My success was a weapon they were actively turning against me. I looked at the clock on the stove. It was too late to call anyone tonight, but the terror of exposure hardened into something much colder and far more resilient. Wade Prescott wanted to use the truth about my current life to shame me. I realized I had to use the truth about my past to destroy him. Tomorrow morning, I would not go to the construction site. I would drive directly into downtown Pittsburgh. I would sit in Janine Crawford's office, and I would finally open the sealed addendum. The morning air in downtown Pittsburgh was thick with the smell of wet asphalt and river salt. I parked my truck 3 blocks away from the Department of Human Services and walked the rest of the way, my boots echoing sharply against the cold pavement. Every breath I took felt like inhaling needles. I didn't go to the job site. I didn't check the steel delivery. I just walked toward the gray stone building that held the beginning of my life in a manila folder. Janine Crawford's office was smaller than I remembered. It was tucked away in a corner of the building, with a single window that looked out over a gravel parking lot and a rusted dumpster. A plastic ficus tree sat in the corner, its leaves coated in a fine layer of gray dust. The desk was a battlefield of paper, stacked high with new cases, a stark reminder that while my life had stopped 23 years ago, the machine had never stopped grinding. Janine sat there, her hands folded over a thin folder that had been pulled from the archives. The seal was broken. The edges of the paper were slightly yellowed, but the ink was as black as a fresh bruise. She didn't say hello. She just slid the folder across the desk toward me. "Take your time, Brooke," she said. Her voice was low, carrying a weight that hadn't been there during our first meeting. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." She stood up and closed the door behind her, leaving me alone with the silence of the room and the hum of a flickering fluorescent light overhead. I reached out and opened the folder. These were the handwritten notes of Margaret Paulson, the original caseworker. The handwriting was cramped and hurried, the script of a woman who had too many children to save and not enough hours in the day to do it. I began to read. Interview number 1, March 7th, 2003, Mrs. Ellison confirms decision to relinquish. Asked if coerced. States no. Appears distressed. Mr. Ellison present. Aggressive. States child is not biologically his. When asked for documentation, specifically a paternity test, Mr. Ellison states blood type proves it. No medical documentation provided. Advised to seek DNA testing. Mr. Ellison refused. There was a quote written in the margin, underlined twice. I don't need a test to know. My vision blurred for a second. I could see him. I could see Gary standing in that drafty kitchen 23 years ago, his jaw set, his eyes cold and certain. He didn't need a test. He didn't need a doctor. He just needed to be right. He had looked at me and seen a stranger, and because he believed it, it became the only truth allowed in that house. I turned the page to the second interview. March 10th, 2003. Mrs. Ellison alone. Asked again. Are you sure? You can change your mind. Mrs. Ellison states, this is my decision. Eyes red, hands shaking. No retraction. I read those words 4 times. This is my decision. The birthday card Donna had slipped into my bag, the one that said this isn't what I wanted, felt like a lead weight in my memory. It was a lie, or worse. It was a comfort she gave herself so she wouldn't have to feel like the villain. She had been given a way out. A stranger in a government office had looked her in the eyes and offered her a chance to keep her daughter, and Donna had looked back and said no. The third interview, March 14th, signing day. Both parents present. Final confirmation required. Mrs. Ellison signs. Mr. Ellison signs. Mrs. Ellison whispers something to intake staff. Inaudible, not recorded. Recommendation for follow-up welfare check on family dynamics. Not assigned. Caseload capacity exceeded. I closed the folder. The sound of the paper hitting the desk was like a gunshot in the small room. She was asked 3 times. I said the words out loud, but my voice didn't sound like mine. It was flat and hollow, a dead thing. Donna had been given 3 separate opportunities to choose me. 3 times the system had paused the clock and asked her if she wanted to change the ending. And 3 times she had looked at Gary, or looked at the floor, and chosen the easier path. She didn't have a choice, she had told me on the phone. But the paper told a different story. She had a choice, and she had used it to walk away. I stood up, but my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I walked out of the office, past Janine, who was standing by the water cooler. She tried to say something, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. If I stopped, I would shatter, and I didn't have the time to pick up the pieces. I made it to the parking lot and climbed into my truck. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned the color of bone. Rain began to fall, a light, cold drizzle that streaked the windshield. I watched the wipers, but I didn't turn them on. I let the world blur behind the gray water. For 23 years, I had told myself a story. I told myself I was a victim of poverty. I told myself my parents were desperate people who had been pushed to the edge by a cruel world. I had built my entire life on the foundation of that tragedy. Every dollar I saved, every hour I worked, every brick I laid was a way of saying I will never be that desperate again. But the tragedy was a lie. I hadn't been sacrificed to save the family from hunger. I had been discarded to save a man's ego. I had been traded for a quiet house and a husband's approval. I had spent my life trying to prove my worth to a woman who had already decided I wasn't worth the trouble of a single phone call or a $10 DNA test. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I saw the calluses on my hands. I saw the lines of exhaustion around my eyes. I saw a woman who had built a fortress out of her own loneliness. I had spent every waking moment trying to be perfect, trying to be undeniable, trying to be so successful that no one could ever throw me away again. But the truth was, it didn't matter how perfect I was. It never did. Gary would have hated me even if I were a saint, because I was a living reminder of a mistake he thought he'd made. And Donna would have left me even if I were an angel, because leaving me was the only way she knew how to keep him. The ache in my chest shifted. It wasn't the sharp, hot pain of a wound anymore. It was something colder, heavier. It was the realization that the wall I had built to protect myself wasn't a fortress. It was a prison. I had been living my life as a reaction to people who hadn't thought about me in 2 decades. I was still that 13-year-old girl on the porch, waiting for someone to wave. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I saw the missed calls from the site. I saw the texts from the drywall supplier. For the first time in my life, I didn't care about the schedule. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, a steady, mechanical heart. I backed out of the space and began to drive. I didn't go back to Lawrenceville. I didn't go to the Strip District. I just drove through the gray streets of Pittsburgh, watching the river flow dark and deep under the bridges. I thought about the birthday card. Happy 13th, baby girl. I realized then that Donna didn't love me. She loved the idea of being a mother who loved her daughter. She wanted the emotion without the sacrifice. She wanted the card without the commitment. And Gary didn't hate me. He didn't even know me. He only knew his own pride. And I was just the casualty of his need to always be the smartest man in the room. I drove until the sun began to set, a dull orange glow struggling against the heavy clouds. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house looked different. It was just a building. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a shield. It was just a place where I kept my things. I went inside and walked straight to the bedroom. I looked at the cardboard box sitting on the floor, the flaps open, the papers scattered. I picked up the birthday card. I felt the weight of it in my hand. It was just a piece of cardstock and some ink. It didn't hold any power over me anymore. I walked to the kitchen and put the card on the counter. I didn't burn it. I didn't tear it up. I just looked at it. You chose, I whispered to the empty room. I went to the closet and pulled out the blazer I had borrowed. I looked at the cuffs I had folded. I was 36 years old. I had a life. I had a career. I had a future that had nothing to do with the people in Clairton. Wade Prescott thought he could use my success to shame me into paying for their mistakes. He thought my success made me vulnerable. He thought I would pay any price to keep my fortress standing. He was wrong. I wasn't the scared girl on the porch anymore. I wasn't the foster kid who didn't cry. I was a woman who had seen the bottom of the world and built her own way out. They wanted the daughter they had discarded? Fine. I would give her to them. I would give them every single word of the truth. And I would do it in a room where the record could never be erased. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out a legal pad. I began to write. Not a settlement, not a negotiation. I wrote the names of the witnesses I wanted. I wrote the dates of the interviews. I wrote the words from the sealed addendum. I would go to court, not to win a case, but to close a door. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their love. I just needed to be the one who finally walked away. I looked out the window at the lights of Lawrenceville. For the first time in 23 years, the air in my lungs didn't feel like needles. It just felt like air. I was Brooke Ellison, and I was finally enough, all by myself. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the heavy, iron-gray clouds hanging over downtown Pittsburgh. I stood in front of the mirror in my Lawrenceville townhouse, adjusting the lapels of the charcoal blazer I had borrowed from Lena. It was a fraction too large, the fabric smelling faintly of her floral detergent, but it felt like a layer of armor. I didn't look like the 13-year-old girl standing on a porch with a trash bag full of clothes. I looked like a woman who managed million-dollar budgets and held contractors to the millimeter. I looked like someone who belonged to herself. I drove toward the Allegheny County Courthouse, the tires of my truck humming against the damp pavement of the Fort Pitt Bridge. The city looked cold and indifferent, its steel skeletons rising out of the mist. I parked in the same lot where I had sat and spiraled weeks ago, but this time, I didn't hesitate. I walked through the metal detectors and followed the signs toward Conference Room B, my boots clicking with a hollow, steady rhythm against the marble floors. Inside the room, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and floor wax. Gary sat in his wheelchair at the left-hand table, his right side slumped, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere near the baseboards. Donna sat beside him, wearing a floral blouse that looked too thin for the November chill. Her hands were buried in her lap, fingers twisting a tattered tissue into a gray ball. Wade Prescott sat between them, his cheap suit bunched at the shoulders as he obsessively straightened a stack of papers. He didn't look up when I entered. My attorney, a sharp-eyed woman from legal aid, sat at the right-hand table. She gave me a brief, professional nod. I sat down and stared straight ahead, refusing to look at Donna or Gary. I watched the dust motes dancing in the pale light of the high windows. The judge entered, a man with white hair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of river stone. He sat down and adjusted his glasses, peering over the bench at the case file. The room fell into a silence so absolute I could hear the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock and the labored, wheezing breath coming from Gary's chest. Wade Prescott stood first. He cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. He began his presentation with a practiced, oily confidence, citing the Pennsylvania Filial Responsibility Statute and the 2012 Pittsburgh precedent. He spoke about a daughter with a senior project manager's salary and a townhouse in a gentrifying neighborhood. He used words like duty and family and moral obligation as if they were things he actually understood. "My clients have reached the end of their resources, Your Honor," Wade said, spreading his hands. "Their daughter has the means to ensure they are cared for. The law is quite clear on this point." The judge looked at my attorney. "Counsel?" My attorney stood up. She didn't use flowery language. She reached into her manila folder and pulled out a single photocopied page. "Your Honor, we move to dismiss this claim with prejudice," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a cold wind. "We have one exhibit for the record. The voluntary relinquishment of parental rights, signed by both Donna Marie Ellison and Gary Robert Ellison on March 14, 2003. The parent-child relationship between my client and the plaintiffs was legally terminated 23 years ago. Under Pennsylvania law, filial responsibility requires an existing legal parent-child relationship. This one was severed by the plaintiff's own signatures." She walked forward and placed the document on the judge's bench. The judge picked up the paper, his eyes moving back and forth behind his spectacles. The room went cold. I watched Wade Prescott's face as his oily confidence drained away, replaced by a gray, sickly pallor. He looked at Donna, but she wouldn't look back. He looked at the paper on the bench as if it were a snake that had just bitten him. "Counselor," the judge said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble, "did you review this document before filing this claim?" Wade opened his mouth, then closed it. A bead of sweat broke at his hairline. "Your Honor, the biological relationship. I asked if you reviewed this specific document," the judge interrupted, his hand slamming flat against the bench. "I was not aware of its existence at the time of filing," Wade whispered. The judge took off his glasses and let them drop. "Then who advised your clients to pursue this claim without checking whether their parental rights were still intact?" "This court does not appreciate having its time wasted." Wade didn't answer. He couldn't. I stood up then. My voice was low, but it didn't tremble. "Your Honor, I'd like to add something to the record. Not for the legal argument, just for the record." I reached into my own folder and pulled out the DNA reports and the summary of the sealed addendum. I held them up so Donna and Gary could see them. "This is a paternity report from a certified lab," I said, looking directly at Gary. "It confirms I am your biological daughter. You threw me away because you looked at a chart on the internet and decided you couldn't be wrong. You were wrong for 23 years. Gary's hand twitched against the armrest of his wheelchair. A low, garbled sound came from his throat, but no words formed. He looked down at the floor, his shoulders sinking. I turned my gaze to Donna. "And this is the caseworker's addendum. It says you were asked 3 times if you were being forced to sign. You said no every single time. You knew I was his, and you signed anyway because it was easier than standing up to him." Donna broke, burying her face in her hands and sobbing. "I did what I had to do," she wailed. "No," I said, my voice carrying a vast, quiet clarity. "You did what was easier. You chose him. And today, the law is choosing me." The judge waited until I sat back down before he spoke. "Case dismissed with prejudice." "Mr. Prescott, I'd advise you to review your professional obligations regarding due diligence." Wade Prescott began frantically shoving papers into his briefcase and walked out without looking at his clients. Donna stood up slowly and began to push Gary's wheelchair toward the door. As they passed my table, she stopped and looked at me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I looked at the woman who had 3 times said yes to a life without me. "I know," I said. I didn't forgive her. I just acknowledged the truth. I watched them leave and sat in the silence for a long time. Later, I drove back to Lawrenceville and looked at the graduation photo on my refrigerator. I didn't see a lonely girl anymore. I saw a woman who had built a life out of nothing. My laptop chimed with an email from Lena asking if I wanted to grab lunch tomorrow. I typed back, "Yeah, lunch sounds good." I went to my bedroom and looked at the cardboard box on the floor. I picked up the birthday card Donna had written 23 years ago and put it back inside. I closed the flaps and pushed the box into the closet. It was a part of my story, but it wasn't the ending. I am Brooke Ellison. I am 36 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am not waiting for anyone to wave goodbye. I am the one walking forward. This story serves as a powerful reminder that your worth is never defined by the people who failed to see it. You may spend years building a fortress of independence to prove you are enough, yet true freedom comes when you stop performing for an audience that was never worthy of you. Brooke's journey teaches you that while the truth can be devastating, it is the only foundation upon which you can build an authentic life. Choosing yourself is not an act of betrayal against family. It is an act of loyalty to your own soul. You do not owe your future to those who traded your past for their own comfort. As you reflect on Brooke's strength, ask yourself, have you ever had to choose between a painful truth and a comfortable lie to protect your heart? We invite you to share your own experiences of finding strength in the face of rejection in the comments below.